Hello, hello. Welcome back to Peak Northwest, an outdoors and travel podcast by the Oregonian and OregonLive, dedicated to the adventure and exploration of our beautiful Pacific Northwest. I'm Jamie Hale.
And I'm Jim Ryan, and together we take you to some of the most beautiful and interesting destinations in our region, discussing where to go, what to do, and places to see. But first, we want to give a special thanks to our sponsor, Mid-Columbia Medical Center, which provides specialty care for athletic injuries in Portland and beyond. So thanks so much for supporting the show. Today, Jamie, I'm especially excited for our show because we are actually going to head out on the river for an introduction to an outdoor pastime that I think it's safe to say for the two of us that we aren't exactly experts on.
Speaking for myself, I would say absolutely not. But Jim, it's so cool. Sometimes in the show, we can recount our travels or share the skills that we've learned in the outdoors. But some of my favorite shows that I just love the most are when we have people on here on the podcast who can teach us about their outdoor activities, their skills, their experiences that you and I might not be familiar with.
Yeah, one of the things I hold closest, Jamie, I think about the kind of work that we do is the curiosity that journalists have in their work and being able to meet engaged, interesting people who are so passionate about what it is that they do. And the podcast is a really fun outlet for that. Today, we're going to dive into the pastime of fishing here in the Northwest. From the start, I had ample opportunities to get into fishing as a youngster, as a child. I grew up on a lake back in northern Michigan, and I did go fishing sometimes, but I didn't really 100% fall for it. And one of the things I love about it is that you can do it from the time that you are old enough to pick up and hold a fishing pole throughout the duration of your life. And I think that's so cool and such a great pastime. And Jamie, I don't know if you've noticed, but it's getting nicer and nicer to get out on the river these days.
Yeah, Jim, like yourself, I have not had much fishing experience at all. Like I remember going to like a birthday party when I must have been like 5 or 6 years old. You go to the fishery and, they go to the little pond they've stocked with some fish and you can, dip a pole in and pull out something and they help you with it. That was the extent of my fishing experience, which is to say not very much.
Yeah.
So today to talk to us a little bit more about fishing, is someone who has, quite a lot of fishing experience, certainly more than the two of us. Today with us in the show is Bill Monroe, who covers fishing, hunting, and wildlife for the Oregonian and OregonLive. Bill, how are you doing today?
I'm doing great. You mentioned you could start fishing from the time you're old enough to hold a pole, but you stopped short of saying it, but I'll go ahead and say it until you're too old to hold a pole. I'm getting closer to that, but I've been very, very fortunate all my life to have worked in a field that I love and revere completely. And those who read or have read the Oregonian since I began in 1981 may recognize me as something other than an expert because it's been at times the good, the bad, and the ugly. But I've really enjoyed being outside in the most beautiful part of the world.
Yeah, well, Bill, now we're getting into spring here, in the most beautiful part of the world. It's obviously a time when people are out and about and getting back into nature. It seems like it's as someone who doesn't know about this, it seems like a good time to get out and go fishing again. Is this kind of the time of year when people go out and they start, and seeing what they can catch out there?
Well, it is, sure. Yeah, spring is. Despite today's clouds, spring is springing for sure. But, COVID was kind of a boon in kind of a macabre kind of way. It really awakened an interest in the outdoors. For these last couple of years, it's been the only way that people can get away from having to wear a mask or be around others and get out and get some fresh air and enjoy the outdoors. And so there have been some significant upticks in the number of fishing licenses sold and even hunting to a degree. And also hiking, boating, bird watching, they've all had a surge of interest. Yeah, sure, it's spring, but this has been going on. And of course, the mild winter has helped enable people to get out too. It's not just the river, by the way, to get on the river. We're rich with water in spite of the drought. We've got streams and alpine lakes, reservoirs, an ocean, and tons of neighborhood ponds. And they all offer opportunities for people to get out and go fishing.
Very much so, Bill. And I'm curious for, those who are interested in going to check out some of those neighborhood ponds, getting out on the river, going up to an alpine lake once maybe some of the snow melts. For the completely uninitiated, how would you recommend that someone gets into fishing on a very broad brushstrokes basis here?
It's kind of one of those, let me count the ways. We're one of several states, and I think we're probably at the premier top of the list, where you can go somewhere any day of the year and cast a line or wet a line in whatever pond, lake, river, ocean, or whatever you're doing, any day of the year, and expect to get a bite on something somewhere in the state of Oregon. Regardless of the weather or conditions, there's always something to do in the way of fishing. And we've got native trout, salmon, sturgeon, smelt, and those are just native. And in the ocean, of course, with its own salmon and rockfish, halibut, flounder, clams, crabs, and then we've got tons of introduced species, bass and panfish, walleye, catfish, just to name a few. There's just lots and lots to do. We even have a bounty on a fish called a pike minnow, where people can go out, and actually they're not all that difficult to catch, especially coming up in June when they're up in the shallows close to the shoreline to spawn. But you can get paid $8 per fish by the Bonneville Power Administration, well, via the Washington Department of Fish and Wildlife. Oregon is in on it too. But that's a bounty program because they eat baby salmon, and of course everyone's these days are trying to save baby salmon. It's kind of like, Oregon fishing is kind of like poker. There's lots and lots of ways to play. You start your day with eternal optimism, and then either combine skill and luck to either win or lose. Except that fishing is a lot more memorable than a card game.
I love that. Much better for your pocketbook as well, though. I'm sure there are plenty of ways to get in deep fishing as well. But so Bill, that leads me right to the next question I have for you is, let us in on the magic. Why is this such a special pastime for you? And how would you hook folks to say, get out on the water and try this for yourself?
I hope this comes across conversationally, and I have to tell you that I fudged a little bit, and you wanted some colorful language, and that doesn't always come off of the top of this aging brain. But I did write down some thoughts, and I'll just go ahead and read it and hope it makes sense. You asked for visual language and description, and that's so hard to quantify, especially when we only have a relative few minutes here, because there's so much to love. Now, I'm looking. I don't know if you heard my clock in the background here a moment ago, but it was a chickadee. It brings a different bird on top of every hour, and so I've got that to remind me. And I look out the window of my study right now, and I'm watching squirrels in the squirrel feeder and chipmunks and doves on the ground feeding, and several different types of birds, and thinking about wanting to go out and go fishing here pretty soon. And there's an undeniable magic in being outside. Mm-hmm. Humans, of course, developed over the eons from our dependence on our natural environment. We've got here in Oregon, we've got blue skies and snow-capped mountains, the sounds of surf on the rocks and sand, and wild animals coming and going, children laughing, dogs coming back and forth. There's even beauty for me anyway in raindrops. Maybe not so much when they're under your collar instead of outside it. But, go up to the Bonneville Dam in late April and watch the runoff. How can you not be impressed by the roar of water from two nations and 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 states pouring out its heart into the ocean, which isn't all that far away. Or maybe when you're turkey hunting and you look through a cobweb that's got the dew on it as the sun comes up behind it. fishing embodies all of that, whether it's the water quietly lapping the shoreline of a lake, or especially for me, the relentless, and it is relentless, beauty of a running river. It's just fishing waters the soul. There's just nothing quite like being outside and experiencing the wonders of a being much greater than we are. Not to mention, of course, there's that thrill of an unexpected bite or the bobber moving with something tugging out of your view, but it's potentially a meal to take home. It's kind of like kind of like drawing to an inside straight, only it's a lot more nourishing for both body and soul.
I love that. I can feel your passion and your connection to nature and to the land, to that activity just pours through you there, Bill. That's really beautiful. Thank you for sharing that.
There's a term for the earth as a living, breathing thing. It's called Gaia. And we need to recognize that we're part of something much greater. We're all a part of what surrounds us. The earth is not an infinite resource. It requires that we not only be a part of it, but as the apex predator, we have to also care for it. And, it's just something that is so ingrained in me from when I was a child that first picked up a fishing pole when Dad was stationed at Tongue Point in Astoria. My first fish was a yellow perch. It was just a small little guy, it probably wasn't 6 or 7 inches. I took it home and flopped it on the table in front of my mother's bridge club. Thank God they oohed and awed. But it's just, we all have to pay attention to the outdoors, and there's so many distractions now, and I'm concerned, but glad that COVID has been driving some people outdoors to awaken that reality. There's so many distractions now as technology seems to be engulfing us, that we need to get out and realize that we're a part of the natural world, and so are the fish, and there's a bond between us that simply cannot be broken.
That's beautiful. I think you're right. And I think circling back a little bit to what we were kind of getting into earlier, I mean, so for folks who hear that and who feel, say, really inspired to get out and try fishing as a way to connect in that way, what's the pathway? Do I go out and buy a fishing pole and head out to my nearest lake? Do I head off to the riverbank somewhere? Go with a guide, with a friend who knows how to fish? How do you even get started doing that?
There are some factors that, they're not ground rules, but there's some basics. If kids are involved, you want them to be excited and feel their pole wiggle. You don't want to have them sitting in a boat waiting for 6 hours for a salmon to bite. You take them to a trout pond somewhere, and you pay a little bit of money to the trout farm person, and she loans you a rod and reel, and all of a sudden you're connected with the other part of the underwater world. It'll cost you some, and then you take it home and eat it, and you've come full circle for the first time. Now, if you've got your mind on something else, or don't have children, the Department of Fish and Wildlife has got an extensive program of trying to reach out to beginners for fishing. I would suggest a couple of things. Figure out what interests you or where you want to go. Like I said, you can go anywhere in Oregon and find something to fish for. Figure out where you want to go, perhaps, and start from there, and then hit a local tackle store. Those guys, like the Department of Fish and Wildlife, are also interested in your success, because that will bring you back as a potential customer. And they're always full of information. The tackle stores now, not the big box stores. You're unlikely to find anyone, say, in Fred Meyer Weimart, who's got some tackle-oriented folks, but I'd stick to like Sportsman's Warehouse or Fisherman's Marine, or just a local mom and pop tackle store to ask them where to go and what's going on. You can go out and you can observe some places where crowds seem to be collecting. The Department of Fish and Wildlife also has an extensive, right now, a winter and spring trout stocking program going on. and you can go online and see what ponds have been stocked, and those trout, you won't have to pay like a trout farm per inch, but you will have to have some basics, and it's pretty easy. Just a bobber and a worm underneath it on a hook. That's pretty easy to pick up at a store and go out and wet your whistle. Now, if something else interests you, like anywhere from rockfish out in the ocean to a longer trip offshore for salmon or halibut, then you'll have to probably start with a charter. There are a lot of us have neighbors and friends who have boats, and who would be willing to take you for gas money, or you always want to offer to help pay the freight. Or you can hire a guide. The guides, we've got hundreds of, maybe even, I don't know how many guides are in Oregon. At least hundreds. I was thinking maybe 1,000 or more, but there are some very, very good guides, and like the others, they're usually very willing to share their expertise, even when they know that you may come back with your own boat sometime and copy what they're doing. Figure out where you want to go, or maybe your spouse wants you to take her to Central Oregon, and you say, well, what's going on in Central Oregon? There's a lot going on in Central Oregon. The lakes are about to lose their ice and turnover. It's called turnover. The cool water rises to the top instead of the bottom, or the warmer water comes up instead of, and the ice and the cold water goes down. But when that happens, then there's a pretty good bite. Or she or he may want to go to the coast. Their jetty fishing at high tide is usually pretty decent. It gets a little dangerous, and there are a lot of cautions involved, but you pick the right tide and the right weather, and you've got a good chance at some rockfish off of jetties, or go crabbing. Razor clam digging right now is excellent. 7 days a week in Oregon, off of Clatsop beaches from Tillamook Head north to the Columbia, all of Seaside, Gerhardt, in that area. It just depends on what you want to do. Figure out what you want to do, and then ask someone at a tackle store, or go to the Department of Fish and Wildlife. Or actually, you can go to the Department of Fish and Wildlife first and look at all of the information they have for beginners, and say, okay, that's where I want to start.
I like that, Bill. Well, we are going to take a short break here. And when we come back, we're going to jump into some more tips for folks maybe in the camp Jamie and I am in, which is a little bit on the beginner side of things. All right, folks, we are back with Bill Monroe talking fishing here in the Pacific Northwest. And Bill, you've really given us a rundown of a lot of good information about fishing, what's hooked you about it, no pun intended, and how folks should get involved. But one of the things that we kind of breezed past a little bit is Oregon's fishing seasons. I imagine akin to hunting or other activities, there are very specific times of year that you do different kinds of fishing, different activities. So as we get deeper into the springtime now, Bill, what is on the horizon for you? What are you looking forward to?
I mean, which one of my children do I like best? You're supposed to save the hard questions for last, I suppose.
Yeah. It's after the commercial break, at least.
Well, I say that with tongue only partially in cheek, because unlike hunting seasons, fishing seasons, they exist certainly, but there are so many more of them. Hunting seasons are pretty much a fall thing, with very few exceptions. And you make choices on hunting, and it gets pretty tightly controlled. Fishing, you buy a license, and like I said, you can go anywhere just about in the state any day of the year. Right now, as I mentioned, we've got razor clam digging. Crabbing is good until they start molting in July. Bottom fishing is good. It's lingcod season. They're starting to get on their nests offshore. It's spring Chinook season in the Willamette River. It's trout season throughout the winter and spring. winter steelhead in the rivers on the coast. What I'm looking forward to right now is leaving for Kauai next Tuesday.
Ooh.
And perhaps getting into some snorkeling for lobster, and maybe even get out, if I get a chance, get out for a little bit of yellowfin tuna fishing. That's on my immediate horizon.
All right.
And when I come back, then I'm probably right now at this part of spring, I really prefer spring Chinook fishing. Spring Chinook come in early, and they have the highest oil content of all of the salmon species, and the Willamette and Columbia spring Chinook are even have a higher oil content than Copper River Kings, which are marketed much differently, of course. But I really want to get out and get some hatchery spring Chinook into my freezer, and so I'll probably do that when I get back. And then, well, through the summer, there will be a couple of sturgeon seasons. I don't trout fish as much as I used to. I will do some fly fishing with my brother and sisters. Probably end up there sometime in June or so, as the water, as I said, the water gets friendlier for fishing. But that's on my immediate horizon. And then late summer, I really, really enjoy salmon fishing in Astoria. It's like bumper boats and crowds and fish biting, whales rolling, sea lions stealing fish. It's quite a circus, and I strongly urge anyone who hasn't experienced it to hire a guide and do it pretty soon, because the guys will be booked up. They're looking at another fairly good run of Chinook and another really good run of coho down there this year. So that'll take me into, I'm pretty salmon oriented anymore, and that'll take me into salmon season, maybe on Tillamook Bay, and then a long winter's nap when I'm forced to do nothing but hunt turkeys and geese. It's dirty, thankless work, I tell you.
That's so much that you're up to. That's amazing. It's great to hear just how much fishing you do, how many different kinds of fishing you do. I mean, just the whole, how many different places you go to. And I think that kind of leads into, not to ask you another difficult question, because I imagine this might be another difficult one following that. But, you mentioned all these different places. Do you have some particularly favorite places to go fishing? And if that's too hard of a question, are there any spots you know of that I feel like maybe they're especially good for beginners?
Well, it's difficult again because you don't know what the beginner wants to do.
Sure.
Right now, my favorite place for salmon is going to be the Willamette River. My favorite place for salmon later will be the Columbia and Astoria and perhaps the ocean. My favorite place for trout right now, a beginner, and I don't mean to say rank, I mean the very beginners that don't want to do salmon or something exotic like sturgeon or brave the waves and get out. There are a number, Bethany Pond, Commonwealth Pond, Freeway Lakes down by Woodburn, North Fork Reservoir in May. These are all stocked with trout. My favorite place for trout would be with my brother up in the Century Loop somewhere out of Bend, because I like it up there. Steelhead, I don't know. I like the Wilson River and maybe North Fork Nehalem. They've got some really good bank access in parts of the North Fork Nehalem. The sturgeon fishing isn't easy from the bank, but it is possible. It's done a bit out of Bonneville. It's mostly catch and release, by the way. There are some keep seasons. But that's a tough question, but it's not because I want to divulge any secrets. It's just, like I said, which of my children would I prefer to be with?
Well, there's so much to get into, and you've given kind of the embarrassment of riches here of all of the different opportunities that folks have. here in the Northwest to get out on the water. You're not embarrassed. That's true. That's true.
I'm proud. You know, I spent 7 years in the Navy during Vietnam, and I swore to myself I was going to get back to the Northwest and never leave. And by golly, that's what I did.
I love
Amazing.
that. It's a beautiful place.
There's nothing like it in the world.
Here.
There really isn't. I mean, all those states that may also offer fishing every year, not many of them have an ocean. California, Alaska isn't always accessible. It has an ocean and lots of fishing, but there's nothing. You know, the array of the types of fish we have and the seasons and everything is just, and of course the majestic beauty of the state.
Yeah,
the combinations is compelling.
It's the reason, in part, that this show exists. There's just so much goodness here and so much to get into. And Bill, starting a new activity, a new sport, can be intimidating, in part because there is a new load of terminology to learn, new seasons and intricacies to get familiar with, but also new gear to acquaint yourself with. And in short, if someone wants to go out trout fishing for the first time or get out on the river for the first time, how would you recommend that they get set up with gear?
Trout is probably the number one way people start fishing, and it's
okay.
The absolute, it's hands down the easiest and best way to do it, because there's so much opportunity with the stocking programs of the state. So I would, absolutely start with trout. And as I said, you go into a tackle store and don't be intimidated, because actually those tackle guys are intimidated by people that don't want to ask.
Mm-hmm.
For God's sakes, if you're a male, you are not inherently born with the expertise to immediately know what you're doing when you go fishing. So be humble. Just go start asking questions. And the other good way to do it, to start trout fishing, or any fishing for that matter, is to get online at myodfw.com and look at their education programs and check their website under fishing, and go down and you'll find a whole, you've got to kind of mine the internet, and of course that's where technology comes in, but you'll find lots of information on the department's website about how to begin fishing. There are also a number of pretty good books out there on how to fish. But I would start with a local tackle store, because they'll be much more knowledgeable about what's going on near where you live than a book might be. Well,
Bill, this has been a wealth of information, and we really thank you for taking the time to come on the show here today. This has been super helpful, and I'm hoping that this inspires some folks to get out there, go do some fishing, and hopefully be inspired in the ways you are. So thank you again for taking the time.
Well, it's my pleasure, because the more the merrier. We got so much to do to protect ourselves, and the people doing it are those who want to start fishing. I've got gray hair, so if you see me out there, some guy with gray hair, just ask, and I'm here. I don't have a website, but I do have an email, nwbill@aol.com, and I'll answer questions anytime. I'm happy to do that.
Well, that's very generous of you, Bill. And again, it's nwbill@aol.com if folks want to get in touch and ask some questions of you directly. So, Bill, thank you again, and have a wonderful rest of your day.
Well, thank you very much for asking me.
Well, Jim, that was just a wonderful, wonderful conversation. So much good information from Bill, and such a great message too. I think that was really special.
Yeah, the idea that getting outside, learning more about the environment in which we live, and fostering a relationship with it, that's so important. And honestly is maybe something we could hit on more on the show is, our role in being stewards of these environments we so cherish. And we didn't ask Bill to jump into that or talk about that at all. He took that upon himself. And that was, I think, really keen of him. I liked that a lot.
Yeah. That's a message that I like to try to put out there as well. This idea of, not just what do we get out of being outdoors, but what does the outdoors get out of us being there as well. And I think that people who do fishing or who do hunting, there's obviously, bad actors, of course, but I think the majority of people who do those activities are so deeply tapped into the land in a certain way where that is a part of that activity, not wanting to overfish, not wanting to fish at the wrong times of year, being responsible, being good stewards of that place so that you can continue to do that activity for generations to come. And I think Bill really tapped into that. And that's such a great message to continue to hammer home.
I can't think of a better way to end the show than that. So until next time here, folks, you can watch our videos on the Oregonian's YouTube channel, follow us on Instagram at Peak Northwest, and view all of our travel and outdoors coverage on OregonLive.com/travel. Please leave us a rating or review if you enjoy the show. And if you want to support this podcast and our local journalism, please consider a subscription to Oregon Live. You can find details, of course, at OregonLive.com/pod support. This episode of the show is produced by me, Jim Ryan, alongside Jamie Hale and Andrew Thien.
Stay safe and happy travels, everyone. Until next time, we leave you with this 10 seconds of Zen.
Acast powers the world's best podcasts. Here's a show that we recommend.
If you want to talk about sports, you also better be ready to talk about politics, culture, and business. I'm LZ Granderson, formerly of ESPN, now with the Los Angeles Times.
And I'm Will Leach, currently a contributing editor with New York Magazine.
We host The Long Game with LZ and Leach, a weekly podcast where we break down the biggest stories in sports and how they impact every facet of our lives.
Did the media drop the ball on Brittany Griner?
It took us 3 weeks to realize she was missing, so yeah, I'd say we failed.
Who's done more damage, Jerry Jones or Dan Snyder?
Can we just call it a tie and leave it at that? Is it possible to be an ethical sports fan?
Not when Deshaun Watson's guaranteed $230 million. We are all dirty, LZ. That's The Long Game with LZ and Leach.
Dropping every Wednesday wherever you get your podcasts.
Please tell me Cleveland isn't winning the Super Bowl.
Acast recommends.